Strength is the base for performance, and strength in this regard is referring to the maximum force that somebody can produce. But if we think about performance is really predicated on power, which is the explosive application of force. This is where we're thinking about sprinting, vertical jump, change of direction, etc. Or performance involves the repeated application of force, which of course is endurance. So in this regard, we're looking at force or maximum strength as being the base for performance. When it comes to force production, there are many factors that interact to determine the amount of force produced and ultimately the amount of weight that someone can lift. So if we take a look at the images on the right here, the question is, what factors are coming together to allow these individuals to stand up with these very heavy weights during the squat? So factors such as motor unit recruitment. How many motor units are we able to recruit? And can we recruit the higher threshold motor units that are capable of producing more force? Then we have factors such as rate coding. So even though we are recruiting motor units, what is the action potential frequency? Are we maximizing the force production from those motor units? We also have motor unit synchronization. So are we recruiting motor units at the proper timing, etc.? There's other factors such as the Golgi tendon organ. The Golgi tendon organ actually has an inhibitory effect on force production. So how is that responding to the force requirements when we lift heavy? Actin and myosin content, that refers to, of course, our ability to form cross bridges. So if you have more actin and myosin, you have a greater ability to produce force via more cross bridges. Then we have things such as inter and intramuscular coordination. This is back to the motor unit recruitment thing and synchronization, where these things have to be timed appropriately amongst agonists, antagonists, prime movers, etc. Finally, there could be a joint integrity factor playing a role here, and that is what's known as protective inhibition. If, for example, one of these squatters was to have some knee pain, well, that would of course be indicative of an injury, and there might be some type of inhibition being forced by the nervous system, limiting force through that particular joint. Another example would be if someone has a shoulder issue. There could be a reduction in force production coming from the central nervous system because the central nervous system can tell that there is an issue going on with the joint. But if we take a look at all of these factors in totality, they're coming together very, very quickly to determine how much strength does the person have or how much force can they produce. We really come to the conclusion that motor learning plays a very, very key role in maximum force production. The nervous system type of things, the neural factors involved in force production are of prime importance. We can see the training guidelines recommended for maximum strength development or increases in 1RM highlighted in the red box here. So from a rep standpoint, we're looking at finding weights that are going to cause us to approach near failure, anywhere from 1 to 6 repetitions. That's going to correspond to percentages anywhere from 80% all the way up to, of course, 100%. Now, from a rest interval standpoint, we're looking at enforcing a minimum of a 2-minute rest interval. And this is because we want to have near complete recovery in between sets. This is going to allow us to put forth maximum effort on each set, hoping to maximize motor unit recruitment and rate coding and all of those things that are very important to overload when it comes to developing strength. However, within the guidelines, there is an element of specificity. That is, the heavier you go, the greater the strength stimulus. So training with 90% would be a more specific and therefore greater strength stimulus than would training with 80%. But the heavier you go, the increased likelihood that you might end up out of position in a suboptimal position, and that could maybe increase the chances of injury. But also the heavier you go, the increased time it's going to take to recover. So we're always balancing those things. But there's also an element of training age considerations when it comes to maximum strength development. If we have a beginner and we're looking to purposely increase their 1RM, well, we don't need much specificity here. Doing 3 sets of 10 will be enough of a maximal strength stimulus for those people. But if we have someone who's more experienced, we're going to need a much more specific strength stimulus. That means we might be looking at doing 3 sets of 3 with 90% of the 1RM. When it comes to designing maximum strength workouts, there's a typical session layout that is used. That is, there's typically only one exercise that is trained using maximum strength type of guidelines. So using sets of, let's say, 5 repetitions with 80 or 85% of the 1RM. We would only do that for 1 or maybe 2 exercises, but the remainder of the workout are trained using our general strength type of guidelines, which end up being 8 to 12 repetitions. So if we take a look at where we're going to put this type of work in our session, remind you of proper session order on the right-hand side. We would always do our dynamic warm-up first, and if we're doing power work, that would be next. If we're not doing power work, the first thing we do in the session would be our maximal strength work, or the heavy stuff. This is to, of course, make sure that we're using the neuromuscular system for heavy work while we're nice and fresh early in the session. As we said on the previous slide, when it comes to integrating maximal strength work into programs or workouts, we're really only going to choose maybe one exercise to target for maximal strength type of work, using anywhere from, of course, 1 to 6 repetitions. So which exercises are we going to choose? Well, typically it's going to be some type of squat variation, bench press variation, and or deadlift variation. And this is because these are the movements that are used in the sport of powerlifting. Now, the sport of powerlifting is where we're looking at the 1RM, or maximum weight that we can do in a back squat, bench press, and deadlift. But the point is that the athletes that compete in this sport are training to develop their 1RM year round. That's their most specific thing they're trying to do. So much of what we do in the world of general training or personal training or strength and conditioning is taken from that world. We'll use the principles from the sport of powerlifting, the principles that develop strength the best, and we'll use those when appropriate and where appropriate when it comes to training general pop clients. So back to the topic, which is generally we're going to be choosing a squat variation, a bench press variation, or a deadlift variation. What we're not going to do is use single joint exercises. Single joint exercises are not, or should not, be performed with very heavy loads. And if we're looking for a reference, it's anything that's heavier than what you could do for about 6 reps. And the reason here is because they're isolated single joint exercises, we get a lot of direct strain and stress placed on the tendons when loading those single joint exercises excessively heavy. Some exercises are just not well suited to being loaded heavy. And by heavy, I mean weight you could only do about 6 reps with before you were pretty close to failure. Now, examples of these are going to be single joint exercises. We've already discussed why. It's because of that direct stress or strain that can be placed on the tendons. Now, unstable exercises are also not great when it comes to heavy loading. On the bottom left, we see a rear foot elevated split squat being performed. Now, typically, if we were doing, let's say, a set of 10 reps here, we wouldn't have the client holding on to anything. But in this example, when it's being loaded very heavy, we want to make sure that there is not a stability challenge through the front leg here. So in order to provide extra stability, but still allow us to work a single leg, we're having the person hold on to the rack. So this is a great idea where we're taking a perhaps relatively unstable exercise and making it more stable because we're loading it quite heavy. Now, there are other exercises that really end up providing a big postural challenge or challenges to muscles that we're just not trying to overload. And rowing and pulling exercises are great examples of these. You know, heavy dumbbell rows, heavy barbell rows can be really challenging to maintain that bent over position. The strain in the hamstrings or the lumbar erectors can really be limiting for people. We also see, often we see poor technique in pulling exercises like lat pull downs when things get heavy. People start to use momentum and things like that. So we just want to be mindful of those things when we're picking the exercises that we're going to target for heavy lifting. Before showing some examples of some maximums, in terms of program structure, when we're training specifically for maximum strength development, there are a few options here. Now remember, the general principle is that we're really only targeting 1 to 3 exercises in a particular session using heavy loads, and that's anywhere from 1 to 6 repetitions. So on 2-day split programs, which are the most common, it sets up pretty easy because we would have a bench press focus day on our upper body day, and then our lower body days are going to represent a squat or deadlift focus. And you can see an example up at the top here, where the upper body day, of course, we have the bench press being trained, lower body day is squat. The next time we train this week will still be a bench press focus, but the next lower body day we can have a deadlift focus. Now, 3-day splits are also very common because, again, the 3 most popular exercises that we're going to use for maximum strength type of development is going to be a bench press and a squat and a deadlift. So 3 days of training, 3 exercises to focus on. Now, this can be spread out if we're talking about a split. So a lower body day where we squat here, the upper body day we're going to bench press, and then this lower body day we're going to deadlift. And we might just keep rotating like that through our cycle. Now, full body programs are also an option because, again, full body training is typically done 3 times per week. And we have 3 types of patterns that we're typically focusing on when it comes to max strength development. So you can see what that might look like here. This is an example of a lower body day that happens to have a squat focus. So we have used the back squat here as our exercise that we're going to train using our maximum strength type of parameters. So in this example, we've chosen 3 sets of 5 repetitions using 83% of the 1RM. We would also have our enforced rest interval here, so perhaps 4 minutes. Now, after the client was done doing this portion of the workout, we'd move on to the remainder of the lower body day. And as you can see, we just have 3 sets of 10 here. That general strength type of stimulus, looking to have a well-balanced approach to pushing and pulling. So you can see we have a reverse lunge here, a stiff leg deadlift, and then some isolation work to finish for the quads and hamstrings. Now we can take a look at a lower body example that has a deadlift focus. So in this example, for maximum strength type of work, we've chosen the deadlift here, 3x5 at 83%. The remainder of the lower body workout is general strength. So that's going to look like 3 sets of 10. Of course, that could be 3 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 12, what have you, but this is for illustrative purposes. And then you can see we've balanced our pushes and pulls here. We've got stiff leg deadlift and back squat, and then some isolation work as well. Taking a look at an upper body example. So on our upper body day, we would typically be focusing on some type of bench press variation, and we can see that here. For the maximum strength part of the workout, we've got the bench press, 3 sets of 5 at 83%. And then the remainder of the upper body workout is going to look like a well-balanced upper body workout should, using these general strength parameters anywhere from 8 to 12 reps. So in this example, you can see we've got our 3 sets of 10. And because this is an upper body day, we do want to be mindful of balancing out our pushes and pulls. So if you do the math here of our volume for pushing versus our volume for pulling, you'll see that there's 9 sets for each of those patterns, and I'll point those out to you. Here's a 3 sets of push for our overhead. Here is 3 sets of push for an incline press and 3 sets of pushing for our bench press. This is being balanced by 3 sets of pulling in our pull-up, 3 sets, of course, the dumbbell row, and our face pulls. And finally, we want to show a couple of examples of what a full body session might look like when we're integrating some maximum strength work. So on the left-hand side, we're seeing a day that has a bench press focus. Now this is a full body session, so typically we would start, of course, with our lower body movements, but we're now using our priority method here, And because we're integrating maximum strength, which is very heavy work, we want to do that stuff nice and early. So the bench press then that's being done for 3 sets of 5 here gets prioritized and performed first. But now for the remainder of the session, which is using our general strength type of parameters, we're going to go back to the proper order of exercises, starting with our lower body movements and working our way down. On the right-hand side, we can see our squat focus day. And so for the beginning of the session, we're going to start doing our 3 sets of 5 with the back squat. And then the remainder of this full body session is going to look much like our standard full body session, this time using 3 sets of 10. And of course, yes, you do some core down here, and if you wanted to, some isolation work as well.